Thank you all for joining us on this beautiful and hopefully sunny where you are Monday. My name is Emily. I am the Director of Venture Development at CU Boulder Venture Partners. We help translate CU innovation and research into new startup opportunities, addressing the world's greatest challenges. You're here on the Ask the Expert series. This is put on as a partnership between CU Boulder Venture Partners, CSU Ventures, and the Colorado Clinical and Translational Sciences Institute at CU Anschutz. And really our goal is to help spread insight, build network, and create knowledge for our innovation and tech translation community. We have a very awesome guest here today, my friend Barbara Bauer. Barbara has had a really interesting career spanning deep sciences, large corporations, startups, international stints, and now working with women to place more diverse members on corporate and startup boards. So we have plenty to talk about here today. If any of you in the audience would like to join in, please feel free to use chat or Q&A to ask any questions of Barbara and myself. But otherwise, Barbara, let's go ahead and get started.
That's great. Thank you, Emily. I'm delighted to be here.
Great. So I'd like to start with a little bit of your background and early career. I know that you hold multiple degrees in physics. and I wanted, you know, I think a lot of people in this audience are in this university kind of deeply technical field. And I think what I want to get at here are opportunities and thoughts around moving that scientific research into startups. So can you talk a little bit about what you studied, maybe why you studied it, and what did you do with that in your early career?
Well, I really loved majoring in physics and did get a master's in physics. And there's literally, certainly at that time, very little you could do once you got a master's in physics, unless you wanted to continue in an academic environment. And so I, in order at that time to do graduate studies, you had to learn how to do computer programming. And so once I got my master's degree, I parlayed that into actually working for IBM because I found the field of software to be actually more aligned with what I was interested in, what I wanted to do than physics. I probably almost really hurt a couple of lab instructors during my physics career, because I wasn't very adept at making sure I screwed in the right whatever to whatever. So the sort of abstraction of computing and information technology turned out to be a better fit.
Great. So you translated from the hard sciences into software and into business. Right. Can you tell us a little bit more about where that computer programming at IBM led you?
Yes. So I did work in the Midwest for several years for IBM, and then moved to the East Coast and started working for Bell Laboratories. And at that time, Bell Laboratories, and you all are probably way too young to even remember Bell Laboratories, but they were pioneering very large scale automation of the operations of typical phone companies like Mountain Bell, now US West or CenturyLink, et cetera. And so there was an opportunity to be in one of those groundbreaking, very large automation of software efforts. And it's kind of interesting now because I travel a lot internationally to weird and remote places. And in countries, I find that variants of the software that we produced in those days in Bell Laboratories has made its way around the world in one form or another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting how, you know, the threads can tie from early career through to where you are now. So after Bell Laboratories, I think that sounds like it got you into more of this technical side of things. Where did you go from there?
Well, I moved, Bell Laboratories is in New Jersey, and by every February, while I was living in New Jersey, I was feeling depressed and I thought there was something wrong with me, but it turned out it was the weather. And so I started looking for one of the telecom operating company headquarters states. And I've always been really fond of Colorado. And so I came to work for US West in the mid 80s. The Bell system was breaking up, lots of opportunities. And it was an opportunity to apply my technology and software development background to a real operating company and sort of get into understanding what it takes to make a large operating company work like that. So, and I worked in telecom and technology for large companies and for some startups, probably for 25 or 30 years after that.
Yeah. Great. Interesting. And kind of moving between, large corporate technology and startups. Do you have any insights or takeaways there? What was that like, at least maybe in this telecom world, bouncing from there? And then we'll get to your later work, actually building startup ecosystems, but in more of that operational role.
I do think one of the things that I've always liked to do in large corporations was to have a group or a team that was innovative and doing things that were really literally outside the box. In those days, we might call them skunk works. And so I've always had an affinity for, first of all, those kinds of opportunities, as well as the kind of people that are attracted to startup and sort of risky ventures. And I left US West at one point and went out to California and did a startup there, building the software for network management systems for fiber to the curb. And it wasn't especially cost effective in the US at that time. And so our first client was actually East Germany. And so we got to work with East Germany on deploying both hardware that was fiber as well as this network management software. And then I came back. We sold that particular venture and I came back and I worked for US West again and then Storage Tech. And then I started consulting. And I said I would do anything as long as it was international, involved business or education or my background. And so I did some work in Vietnam and Cambodia, and then ended up taking a project and living and working in Myanmar for about 4 years.
Yeah, such an interesting background. I have a couple of questions kind of stemming out of that, but I'd like to talk a little bit more about corporate innovation and what you saw. You're talking about these skunk works or kind of internal innovative R&D teams. Do you think that kind of internal R&D effort still holds true? Do you think that more and more corporates are looking to startups to kind of fill that gap? Where do you see innovation playing nowadays in an industry like telecom?
Well, I do think more and more in a variety of industry sectors, from telecom to medical devices, there's certainly a much bigger awareness and interest and actual capital invested into external ventures as a way of bringing that innovation in. I think all of us who have tried to do really innovative things inside of large corporations, they can be very successful. And we certainly have companies in the US who have been great examples of that. But in many cases, it's rather difficult. It's hard to make change. And when you're introducing something that is perceived to be untested, untried, risky, then it's even harder. And so I do think large companies look more and more, and we saw this at RVC, we would see a lot of the technology ventures planning their exits through, of course, large corporations.
Yeah, sure. And then drilling down a little bit further into that, I think this audience tends to be on this hard sciences, deep tech side of things, and really looking at the first steps towards commercialization. So, I think a lot of stories that we tend to hear about startups tend to be the software startups, tend to be the high growth, low capital intensive startups. Can you talk a little bit more, maybe through your career or even what you've done in the last 5 or 10 years, what you've seen with opportunities for deep tech startups, things like medical devices, therapeutics, hardware, clean tech ventures?
I do think that the industry sectors that would be the attractive companies to acquire those ventures are pretty familiar with the intense investment, not just from a funding perspective, but it's the team you have to put together to make those ventures grow from idea to enough traction to be even considered for a merger or purchase. And I think most company executive leaders are familiar with how difficult it is to put together those teams. And so they do appreciate that, emerging certainly out of university research organizations and laboratories, there is the nucleus, and it's easier to surround that technology, engineering, or science team with, the more typical business skills than it is to form that, because you may need to fund research across a very broad range of particular options in a sector in order to get the one that's going to be, really worthwhile as a commercialization opportunity. And a lot of companies can take advantage of university support and other non-dilutive funding that merges into universities to find those ventures, get to know them, create a pipeline of interest, and then, select the ones that are ultimately more aligned with what they're interested in doing.
Yeah, that's great. I like how you bring this kind of corporate partnership aspect into it. I think us builders at universities are really working with super early stage, pre-company stage researchers to reduce some of the market risk or commercialization risk, which is what corporate is going to buy me, or who is my customer? How do I achieve that product market fit? Before taking any steps in the direction of a startup. I think I've seen, getting more into the world of deep tech startups, you as a founder want to minimize that market risk. So really the technical risk, that ability to actually stand up a minimum viable product, stand up a fully functioning product, is the key risk that an investor, that a customer, that a team member would look at in those companies. Now, granted, that still takes a lot of time and money usually to actually achieve, but I think the work done on that kind of customer discovery and market fit, and then B, what you're bringing up on kind of the founding team and transitioning into a strong leadership team from both a technical and business side. I think those are two elements that people can focus on while they're still on campus in a lab stage. So I think that's great to bring up.
And I know in past years, Emily, when I was working for Storage Tech, because we were close to CU in the engineering department, I was on the advisory board for the engineering department for a while. And it was such a wonderful opportunity to have access to what was emerging, not yet even formulated into a venture or a business or anything like that. And I do think that, getting industry corporate partners to learn about the pipeline along the way is a good thing.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think, especially thinking of a local ecosystem, our Colorado ecosystem, there are many opportunities for corporate partners to learn about ideas, to access licensing opportunities, or to get involved as early partners or even investors in these startups. So I like that kind of ecosystem approach. I want to talk more about startup ecosystems, but first I want to go back to this idea of team. And this will also hint at some of your current work in building leadership teams with Boardbound. But what do you look for in a leader, maybe especially in a business that is taking on technical risk and maybe is structured a little bit more like a hard tech, deep tech startup? What are you looking for in a founding team? What are you looking for as the company grows?
And I'm going to answer that question maybe a little further along the pipeline from sort of the idea generation that might be happening in the laboratory. When you really want to get the attention of serious investors in your venture, then you really do need leadership, which of course is deeply knowledgeable about the technology, but also has a really good understanding of the target marketplace.
Sure.
And a lot of times, at least when I had the opportunity to work with academic colleagues, their passions were around their technology, but because they were so deep in their research work, they didn't have a lot of opportunity to look out at the marketplace. And I think that's one of the challenges to really learn about the marketplace. What makes your idea a viable product, service, technology for some company that has certain characteristics in their return on investment, portfolio, et cetera. And I think looking for and working with advisors who have that is a great way to supplement that. So you certainly want a venture leader to be confident, to be knowledgeable in that space. You want them to be very good listeners as well, because there's no founder that knows everything, whose experience encompasses everything. And having someone who's not able to really hear guidance from other people can be quite challenging.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate that for sure. I think, going back to this idea of risk, it takes that listening. It takes, if not business experience or expertise, at least a willingness to kind of dive into the business side of things. Ultimately, when you're building a startup, your primary focus is not to build a product, it's really to build that business around the product, as we know, right? And it sounds like, there are opportunities if you had no founder, especially in the early stage, is going to be able to fill every gap that an investor, that a first customer is going to want them to fill, which is why we have teams, which is why we have boards, which is why we have advisors. So can you talk a little bit more in depth around filling gaps and where to find people, how to know what you might be looking for, and really why it's interesting for other people to come on and help as early advisors? Or
I think there's a DNA that exists in folks like us that we're just really excited by these new ideas and new opportunities. And I think for someone in an academic situation, a research laboratory who has an idea, reaching out outside of the specific, sort of department or technology to experts in those sectors or functions, whether it's marketing or FDA approval or finance or operations and manufacturing. Every venture has all of these aspects that need real expertise. And, I think about the resources that you bring to to the colleagues on the call with us today, when I was going through university in the dark ages, there was none of that. We didn't know how to spell venture or how to spell entrepreneur for sure. And even when I was working in large companies with these idea generating teams, we didn't have the vocabulary. We didn't know about the processes. We didn't know about how to get early stage investment, what the characteristics were. But that's available now. And CU has such a wealth of resources that researchers, other university colleagues can find and use. To tie it back to this board, I do think starting with advisors, and after you've had a few informal opportunities to work with an advisor, move to a slightly more formal advisory board where you actually might schedule meetings and have a more formal approach, realizing that advisors can be very unique in whatever they're bringing to your venture, but getting experience with those advisors, because they're the ones who probably could be the first candidates for an actual board of directors when you are ready for that.
Sure. So using advisors to fill gaps, when do you usually see companies, or when do you think companies should start going out and seeking that support? And to clarify, advisors, it's a bit more of an informal relationship. It's a supportive relationship, but maybe the timeline, and then how involved should founders be in pulling those advisors in? How often should they be meeting? What does that engagement look like in the advisory level?
I think founders sort of naturally gravitate to seeking advisors when they realize that they've got something that could be a commercial venture. And at that point, they might be going to industry association kinds of conferences and meetings to learn about the landscape, figure out who could be an advisor. And so I think it's, you start that when you have the notion that you have something that could be a commercially viable opportunity. And I think the advisor should grow out of, your natural tendency to find someone who either represents more knowledge in wherever you're going to sell that venture, whether it's NASA or the corner grocery store, but you want to find someone who's adept in that marketplace, who knows what it is to get attention from decision makers in that marketplace. And I think most advisors grow, sort of organically. There are people you start to talk to, over a cocktail reception at some conference, and they're interested in what you're doing. And you perceive them to have some experience, expertise, connections that you don't have. And so that's usually how it gets started. And that's a very great, that's the right way to get started, because you want someone who's really interested in what you're doing. That's the key, but who brings more experience to getting that to be a successful venture than you currently have.
Yeah, I like that. And we keep going back to this element of being able to know what you have and also know what you don't.
Right.
And also the importance of a network, which I think is critical. I want to go back to this leadership idea. I want to walk us down the path of ideation, of informal advisors. I want to bring us to the importance of startup ecosystems. I know you are an ecosystem builder. You work with a lot of different groups within Colorado. I want to go into the startup ecosystem, and then I want to come back out and say, okay, you've got your idea, you've got your advisors, you've met everyone in the ecosystem. Now you're ready to stand up your company and form a board. But first, I want to talk a little bit about kind of your perception of opportunities, especially within Colorado. You've worked in corporate, you've worked with Rockies Venture Club, an angel investing group where we worked together. You've worked with the Women's Investor Network and angel investors in the region. And now you're working with experienced career women to get them on corporate boards. So can you talk a little bit about, maybe why Colorado is unique and exciting and why we love it, and maybe some opportunities for founders, would-be founders, to plug into the space?
Well, I know that the CU has students, researchers, and people with great ideas for ventures from all over the world, literally. And of course, there are wonderful startup ecosystems literally around the world. There is, and so I'm going to preface this by saying I've lived on the East Coast, I've lived in the Bay Area, I've lived abroad and worked abroad, and I've worked with a number of European colleagues to help them find funding. And Colorado, I think, has both a very well-developed ecosystem, but it's an ecosystem which has a hallmark of being approachable and willing to engage and help. I can't think of anyone I've approached in the last 10 or 15 years who has been unwilling to at least listen. They may not talk for a very long time because they might determine I'm not the right person, don't waste your time talking to me, go talk to someone else. So I think we have a rich ecosystem in the sense that we have support from our large academic organizations. We've got networks of experts and investors for everything from really baby ventures all the way up to, I think about PharmaJet now on Series K or something like that. And everybody is approachable. So I was reminded of this in a recent panel that Access Venture Partners put on, and Natty Zola, who's now head of Matchstick Ventures, was talking about the fact that in his current portfolio of ventures, women-led ventures are performing extremely well, actually better than their male counterparts in his fund. But he said in the pipeline of founders that are seeking interest from Matchstick Ventures, they may not be quite ready for investment, whatever, there's a much smaller set of women in that pipeline. And I think one of the things that is probably true of women and likely true also of researchers, you tend to want to be more perfect than perhaps you need to be in order to ask for help. And so it's really better to start the outreach, in early stages, understanding and appreciating that, you need to be selective about the people you reach out to make sure that there is some sort of alignment there. But I think Colorado's general approachability and support is a really excellent attribute we have. And we typically have, I think, and Emily, you know this from our RVC days, our capital valuations, from my perspective, tend to be slightly more realistic than they are on either coast. And so, there are advantages to get started here because you can, because of that and because of this approachability. So it's just a wonderful ecosystem with many varied phases and parts and aspects to it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and you bring up some stats from our favorite topic, which is figuring out how to support more women investors, women founders, and diverse founders. I know Colorado is also tends to rank very high from someone or other, don't quote me on it, of the best state for women entrepreneurs, And yet there continues to be a gap we've seen in the last few years, especially during and post-pandemic, if you can call our current era that. Overall venture capital continues to grow, and venture capital raised by women is growing, but at a less disproportionate, slower rate, which means that really we're going down in how we're funding women. I know you do a lot of work on this on all sides of the table, on the leadership side, on the investor side, and also working with founders. If you had 1 to 3 pieces of advice for a first-time female founder, what would it be?
Well, I really think it would be to seek opportunities to learn and get a broader set of network connections.
Yeah.
So, I mean, even going to, if you've got an idea not yet ready for funding, go to Destination Startup and meet as many people as possible in that room that you don't know, that aren't part of the CU community, but are people who are interested in those kinds of ventures. And so I think it's so painful to do it because it takes time. It appears you can't quite measure or quantify the benefit of spending hours in your very packed schedule to do that. But I think reaching out to attend those events and meet people is the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think, like it or not, whether or not you're looking to raise private capital, I think the venture capital ecosystem, the venture ecosystem, absent of capital, is so network based that I think getting out there early, getting out there before you're looking to raise funding, before you're looking to bring on your first board member.
Yes.
The networking, I think, is critical. And what is fortunate is there are plenty of people, women especially, like me and you, that want to lower those barriers, that are looking to improve access to networks, access to capital, access to resources and education. So I guess that's a call to action for anyone on the call. If you are in this position looking for help, I will offer up Barbara's network as well as my own. Barbara told me before that she doesn't ever say no to an opportunity, which is why we love our Colorado collaborative ecosystem. So I appreciate the network aspect because I think that is critically important.
And Emily, one other thing to add, at RVC, we had such a focus on offering these short workshops. And whether it's RVC's workshops or CU offers them, there are lots and lots of opportunities to learn about what happens once your great idea really has the potential to be a venture, to ensure that you can shepherd it successfully and take advantage of those, these training opportunities are also an opportunity to meet other people and expand your network as well.
Yeah, definitely. All about the network.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the opportunities for founders in the space. Women founders is our particular focus, but that really is applicable to everyone. The network aspect, being in Colorado and taking advantage of that give first culture. I'd like to shift over to the other side of the coin, which might be relevant to folks on the call as well, which is improving access for all the other stakeholders in the ecosystem. And when I say this, I'm thinking about investors who gets to invest in these startups, get actively involved in these startups, and board members who gets to, be on an early leadership board. So from your perspective, I think we appreciate the importance of female founders. There are a lot of people of all demographics across the ecosystem that are looking to invest more in women, that are looking to invest more in BIPOC founders, underrepresented founders. Why, in your perspective, is it so important that the decision makers are of that same demographic as well?
Well, I just think there's been so much research around the world about the benefits of diversity in every single sphere. If you only have someone who looks like you, talks like you, thinks like you, your options when you're considering problems or challenges or opportunities are limited to what exactly you have, and why have 4 more people just like that, as opposed to bringing in people who have diverse perspectives and experience, and can really improve the way you can look at a problem or challenge and the options that it might be available to solve it. There's just no question that diversity helps, whether you're in a kindergarten class or on a Fortune 500 board. There's something that we have started saying, and that is that balanced boards are better, which means, let's say you have a 7-person board. So either 3 or 4 of the people who are your board directors are women or men, so that you have a fairly equitable distribution, at least along that particular axis of diversity. Then you really need to think about the ethnic diversity, the experiential diversity. We had a recent event where we asked CEOs to share their insights about board diversity, their challenges, their opportunities, successes. And one of them is the CEO of what we call a SPAC fund, which is essentially a public offering with the intent to purchase a company that will fulfill whatever thesis that particular offering has. And he said when he and the other investors formed that, they explicitly decided to identify women who they felt had great potential as board members in the future, and bring them onto their board, given, of course, that all of their other requirements were met. But they identified, because they basically said, we want to take the incredibly great returns we're going to get from this SPAC, and we will expand that and do it again. And so we're going to leverage our first board again and again as we expand. So let's start with the diversity that we know we need and leverage it as we go forward.
I like that. And I think, the last time we had chatted about your work building boards, I think your key word in this work is intention. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, nothing that you want to have happen happens unless you have the intention and you make it visible and operational in everything you do. So you can wish for board diversity and get nowhere, but if you actively, you do silly things like put reminders on your laptop, I need to ensure that every opportunity that I have available for an employee, an executive, a board member, that we are considering a diverse slate of candidates. And we know the research from Stephanie Johnson, who's on Leeds faculty. If you are proposing a slate of candidates for a board opening, one of them is a woman, the rest are men, that woman has almost 0 chance of being selected for the board. But if that slate includes 3 women, it's a very high probability that one of those women will actually have an opportunity to get on that board. And in intention, you just have to question every single thing you do and say, could I have done something here that would have improved our diversity? The answer is almost always yes. We never, we're just not good at it yet. And so we just have to always say that ahead of time and then ask it again after, whether you're hiring someone or inviting a speaker or hosting anything. What have I done that ensures that we will achieve diversity?
Right. I love that. And I think my vision of the future is that all of this is wrapped up in broader and more institutionalized corporate governance, startup governance, best practices, if not laws. environmental considerations, diverse governance considerations. My optimistic mind is this is where private industry, from investors, from regulatory standpoint, is going. I think it's the NASDAQ that is requiring diverse boards now to list. I know California has a law, although that might be getting shot down. Do you think that those kind of regulatory mandates make a difference, or do you think that it will in the future?
Within the organization I currently support, we have diverse opinions about regulations, mandates, etc. Because the research has been so compelling about the benefits of diversity on boards, I personally lean towards, if we can execute a mandate and improve diversity, those companies will improve their financial results, the community will be better for it, because when you improve diversity on the board, not only the financial results, but also the intangible results also improve. You have fewer scandals, you have fewer, lawsuits, all of these intangible things improve. So if I could wave a magic wand and make that requirement, maybe that would be good. I think it would, but it's just a personal opinion. I was impressed because I read the NASDAQ proposal to the SEC to get approval for their board diversity requirement program. Mm-hmm. They carefully phased it so that it was actually feasible to achieve, because you can't just, overnight say your board has to be diverse, because it's a hard process to bring in new board members. So they not only had the right practical phasing, but they probably had 150 pages of the research results. And I'm like, okay, after the first 10 pages, I was with you. They had done literally their homework. But I think every state, every organization has a different personality and characteristics. And so it's not feasible to think about mandating something across the United States, much less around the world. I think every state has to figure out how to achieve the benefits that you want from board diversity. And one way might be a mandate or requirement, but there are other ways as well.
Sure. I appreciate that. And I like the vision. We have a question from Tamara, just talking more about board diversity. When we talk about diversity, is it mainly gender, or does it include other categories? What's your take?
In general, when we talk about diversity, includes all sorts of diversity. The organization I currently support, Boardbound, we're very focused on gender diversity. And that includes, as a very important objective, getting women of color onto boards as part of that overall board diversity. It's very interesting, particularly in Colorado, because we live in a state where there is a very, very strong Latina community. We have, very successful Latina women in business and very well educated Latina women across the country. We need 11 times as many Latina women relative to the proportion of the population than any other ethnic or racial group. And so we have a specific committee focused on getting Latina women prepared for board service and then onto boards. But the smart CEO and the smart board chair look at all the elements of diversity, whether it's racial, it could be age, it could be income level, consumer experience, all of that should be talked about. When you look at a board, we typically recommend that they have a board skills matrix. And that's both your professional experience as well as, are there other kinds of experience that you could bring to the board that are important in making a success of this venture? And you need to look at all of that.
Sure. I like that. I appreciate that. I know that your angle tends to be a board of like-minded white women is also not going to do anything. There's a space for everybody. It's really just finding those areas of dissonance or of different thinking to bring out creativity and problem solving. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Tamara, for the question. If anyone else has questions, please keep them coming. We have about 10-15 minutes left. I want to circle back with you, Barbara, to where I promised I would go. So we talked about founders, we talked about the idea stage, we talked about early advisory stage, we got into networking and ecosystem, our favorite conversation on diversity. So let's talk a little bit more about how to do this. Can you tell a little bit more about what BoardBound is, what it does, and how people go about filling out their first board as a startup?
Well, a topic dear to my heart. So BoardBound is an organization that got started a number of years ago, focused on the need to get women on boards. And that was about the 2012 timeframe. And I was involved in that first initiative and then went off to Myanmar to live and work. And then when I came back, as I was working for RVC, I joined the board of this organization, and then about a year and a half ago became the executive director. And we have programs called Corporate BoardBound, where we have women who really do have an objective in the next 2 to 5 years, say, to be able to join a for-profit company board. It might be a publicly traded company, it might be a private company. We have Community BoardBound, which is a program of 8 workshops for women who are interested in the range of nonprofit board service, everything from small neighborhood nonprofits all the way up to the very, very large education, academic, and medical boards, or national and international nonprofits. And we have a program called Board Connect. So a founder, a CEO, a board chair, a chair of a nom and gov committee can contact us and say, we have a board opening. Here's what the skills and requirements are. We'd appreciate a slate of candidates who are women. And sometimes they will say, and we are especially interested in women of color. They might say, we only want candidates from the Western Slope, or we want candidates who live in Atlanta. Each board has its own unique requirements. For founders, I think the biggest challenge is forming your first board, because you will tend to want to fill it with your friends. And our guidance would be, that's not the most important criteria for your board. It can be very difficult to find the right board candidates. And so that's why we and other organizations want to help, because we'd like for you to get started on the right path in terms of board diversity. And managing your first board can be a challenge if you've not had that experience before. And so we are thinking about and hoping, not in the next few months, probably late this year or next year, to offer a workshop on forming and managing your first board.
That would be great. I look forward to that. So I know that is a whole workshop topic, multi-day, multi-hour workshop topic. 3 tactical questions on forming your first board. How many people should you look for? What does it look like to compensate them? And what are expectations in terms of reporting or communicating with your first board?
So frequently the first board for a venture is at an angel round of funding. It's the founder, probably the lead investor. And then, because you always want to have an odd number of people on your board, it could be what we would call an independent director. someone who brings some skill, experience, or partner connections to that board. The compensation, particularly for a venture at the angel or early round, is typically equity. And it's a share of equity that will vest over the next several years, maybe 2 to 3 years. And it's a very small percentage. It might be less than 1%. If you're, I think I used this example in the other webinar, if you are developing a new drug and there's an expert that really is the perfect person to help you through that arcane and challenging FDA approval process, you may want that person to be on the board and offer them slightly more than you might normally. What I would suggest is, rather than bringing that person on the board, figure out a way to compensate them for the expertise you need, because they might not be the ideal board member, they're the ideal expert on that thing. And then what was it about meeting, or what was the third question, Emily?
One quick tip on communicating or meeting with your board. What's kind of a base expectation?
So I think the mantra here is over communicate and be open and transparent and make it routine. So if you have a board that has one or more investors on it, you do need to communicate both to the board and to your external investors. And doing that with a standard template every month, you know, given your expenses and income, is make it a habit. For the board meetings, make them respect your board members. Their time is important, their expertise is important. Have an agenda, work the agenda, stick to the meeting times, make it as professional as possible. You're going to, particularly in an early stage venture, you're going to have lots of conversations with directors, board directors, and investors. But for the board meeting itself, you know, there are standard operating practices that make boards successful. Keep minutes, a formal agenda. And the minutes are not what everybody said. They are important decisions and action items. And we can spend more time on that.
It's a whole course. It's a whole course. But hopefully this at least brings up some, you know, thoughts or ideas or even further questions to ask from either founders in the audience or even folks looking to join their first board.
And one other thing, when you are looking to fill a board seat that is not the founder or the lead investor, identify the skills you want and write out a list of questions that you want that board member to answer, and have that board member interviewed, certainly by the other directors on the board, but also perhaps by members of your team. You want to get as much information as possible.
Yeah, I like that. And I like the earlier point that you made of maybe someone in a consultant or advisory role is not necessarily the right fit for the board. So
Right.
I think there are plenty of resources through Boardbound, through other programming in Colorado and nationally, to help kind of understand in these early stages. Because I also like this idea of, you know, you're going to bring this company to the moon. Let's put these good governance practices in early. Let's get the habits early, which I like. Another question or maybe request from Tamara, would you be able to share an example of a board matrix that you use?
Yes, Emily, I can send you a couple of examples. I'll send them in email afterwards, and then you can share.
Sure, that sounds great. We'll share those with all of the attendees. I think we should have the attendee list.
Good.
I'd love to invite people to ask any more questions. We have just a couple of minutes, and I'll give a second. Thank you, Tamara. I'll give a second if anyone else has anything. In the meantime, Barbara, do you have any calls to action for people in this call, whether it is a founder looking to fill a first board seat, whether it is a woman or anybody that's interested in being a part of a board?
Well, of course, I would encourage, depending on what your interests about boards are, to take advantage of the kinds of programs we offer. There are other programs out there, lots of those opportunities, learn. We typically talk about board governance and board journey. Board governance is what are you legally responsible for once you join a board? So you have a duty of loyalty, which is probably why Elon Musk had to step off the Twitter board, because his comments once he was on that board were not particularly helpful to the company. And so you need to think about the duty of loyalty, the fiduciary duty, and the board journey is how do you find the board you want to be on? We talk about how you make yourself visible through social media. So your bio, resume, LinkedIn profile are key, and looking for a board seat is very different from looking for a job.
I love it. We're so lucky that we have you as a resource in the state, especially for women. We'll have one last question, or if anyone else has any, from Claire. What's your favorite reference when justifying the reason for diversifying boards? I know we all tend to get a little sick of actually trying to tell this part of the story at this point, but do you have a citation, a study? I like that you quoted Stephanie earlier.
I'd almost refer you, except for the fact that it's about 100 pages long, to that NASDAQ proposal. But
there you go, Claire. If anyone asks, just send them that 100 pages of information.
And I do think, I mean, there have been sort of, hallmark studies, and I think McKinsey's one. I'm not pulling it off the top of my head right now.
Great. As we all know, there are plenty, and it is very well justified, but we will keep telling the story if we have to. If anyone else has anything for Barbara, you can reach her via Boardbound. Their website is www.womensleadershipfoundation.org. Barbara, thank you so much for joining us. We'll send out any resources that, oh, sorry, we have one more question and we have 3 more minutes. I am stopping too early. Do you have any recommendations for building a board for a nonprofit?
Yes, I would encourage either you or someone who's already on your board to come to our community Boardbound program. But we are also, thinking about adding a page on our website for nonprofits that are seeking a board director, so that, and we would provide a template, including, what are the specific skills requirements? How often do you meet? What are your expectations of the board? And again, I think the key here is expand your network outside of the, and actually you probably have people on the board who have other networks. If you think the networks for everyone on the board are all the same, then seek external networks.
I love it. Networks is everything.
Yep.
All right. Well, anything else for Barbara? You can find her Women's Leadership. What was it again? womensleadershipfoundation.org. Barbara, it's so fun as always. We really are so fortunate to have you as a leader in our Colorado ecosystem. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it and love talking with you, Emily. We have to get together.
We sure will. We will. All right. Thank you all. And we will see you next month for Ask the Expert.
Great job, Emily. Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. You were a natural.
I chat with Barbara a lot, so
she's awesome. I'm so bummed I had to miss the very first part of it to, the story. So
we got into it, but more in the second part. I think I was trying to tie in our deep tech world a little bit more. Barbara has really deep experience across different technology, so that was fun. Awesome. I'll make sure that you all are connect personally as well. I think she really is great. She just did a webinar for our Ascent Deep Tech Accelerator. That's kind of our stand up a company side of programming for our researchers. And she did a really in-depth, like 1.5-hour conversation on building boards that I think really stood out to people as something unique from what education they typically get. So
That is so
she's
cool.
great. She's a great resource. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. And I will be in touch with you. I'm just trying to cram this, crank this grant out for Ron. But I will be in touch with you very soon to I'll walk through it with you and Sarah again, now that we've kind of finalized everything. And I know Ron and Tim are talking with whomever they're talking with at Boulder to get you guys set. So we'll be in touch.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Kathy. Good to see you on the Zoom. And yeah, we'll chat soon.
All right. Take care.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.